Hello, and welcome to Token Minority Report on Unsafe Space. I'm Beverly Clark, and here with me again is Carter Laren.
I'm not in my comfy chair though, so
No, this time he's less comfortable, so we can get him all riled up and upset about something, maybe. I don't
that's
know.
okay. I'm frazzled already at the end of the day.
Yeah,
So
it's been a long day for you.
it has been a long day. Someone in chat says they're making, or actually, Tex Tara says she's making her kids are making her play Settlers of Catan. I love Settlers of Catan.
Ah,
It's a
yeah,
fun one.
I do too. That's what, when you
Yeah.
guys were talking about it on on Monday, you weren't talking about this. You were talking about sheep, and I was saying calling people sheep is offensive to sheep, like because sheep don't know any better. And I do the sheep army in Catan. Like that's my jam. I just collect
That's
all
your
the
jam.
sheep.
Does that work as a strategy? I've never.
At first, no, never. It
Oh.
was a long, long time before I ever won a game, but I held steady and I eventually learned to use the what's the development cards, and so I planned
Oh.
around that, and I started
Okay.
winning. But
Nice.
uh, but I didn't give up on sheep.
Nice.
Um, so tonight I would like to talk about something exciting and political, the left-right political spectrum, because
Hmm.
I have questions and I hope you have some answers.
I have opinions. I mean, I have the
Okay.
100% objectively proven right answers. Is what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
So
Good. Good,
fire
good.
away.
Um, well, for me, I feel like left and right, and you guys have talked about this a lot too on Covfefe Break and things, where they don't have as much meaning anymore. And before I even got to Unsafe Space, and I've told you about this, I was really struggling for a while when I was trying to figure out what's the difference between liberals and conservatives, because the more I saw people online that like weren't crazy, I would see like, oh, conservatives believe in such and such. I'm like, okay, well, liberals just said they believe in that same thing too. So I was like going back and forth, and I couldn't really figure out what that difference was. And eventually, I was like, I think it's just more based on like certain policies on and what they want from the government. And then it was like a few weeks later, I started watching on Safe Space, and you guys are just like individualism and collectivism, libertarianism versus authoritarianism. Like, oh yeah, okay, that makes way more sense. Like, where were you guys 3 weeks ago when I had this political identity crisis going on?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think that's good about the political crisis that we're going through now and the turmoil that's happening is I think because we're having a lot of angst as a society about, I mean, partly thanks to the radical left because they've gone crazy, right? So people are like, whoa, what the hell's going on? I think it's getting people to question stuff. So I think now it's not that the authoritarian versus liberty spectrum hasn't been around. That's
Right.
not new. Like I didn't invent that. No one like it's
No, you
no one alive
you put it
today
more
invented it. That's been around.
succinctly though,
Yeah,
and
but
I
it
think that helped.
I think it's just that people are listening. Because I think before uh there was the two major parties and it was those for various reasons I guess we can get into. Those are reasons enough to placate people into believing that they were different than the other side in some meaningful way, and there wasn't a lot of principled difference between them necessarily, which we can get into. But neither one of them wanted anyone to notice the authoritarian liberty spectrum because both of them have elements of authoritarianism in them. So, the idea, think about it, the idea that extreme right is considered fascism and extreme left is considered communism, doesn't that make you wonder, like, that automatically sets up an Aristotelian mean fallacy, like a golden mean fallacy of like, well, I guess we should be in the center. But we should be asking yourself, why are the extreme of these two opinions both horrible? Maybe there's another scale we should be looking at where we're not neither one of like where if we do that thing in excess it doesn't lead to genocide, or democide is actually the correct term because it's death at the hands of your own government. So
Oh,
yeah, I think the individualism versus collectivism, or I'll say more correctly politically, the authoritarian versus liberty scale is not new, and libertarians have been passing around that little 4x4
Yeah, I was
matrix
about to say that.
forever, right? That's been a thing
Well,
since, I was a kid.
well, that's what my question on that then too is like, do you the what so you have the up libertarian, authoritarian, then left and right, and I'm still confused by like if people are answering questions like, well, what puts someone over in the left and what puts someone in the right though? Is it just based on like certain policy positions that they or because if someone more like social programs and stuff too, that would just put them more under authoritarian, right? But I think that probably puts them under left.
Yeah, well,
I should have said right,
traditionally,
correct?
yeah, I mean, look, I haven't researched political science to tell you all of the nuance to all of this, but kind of I have been paying attention to this for a while. Traditionally, from like just a layman's way to think about it is, the right wanted some sort of liberty in terms of economics. At least this is by what they profess. And what they profess is actually often different than how they vote, but let's just go off of what the parties have professed. So the right has often professed a liberty mindset when it comes to your wallet and when it comes to businesses. So they say how well we want fewer regulations on businesses. We want you to be able to keep more of your money and have lower taxes, and we want you to have more economic freedom. They're more likely to be against things like minimum wage, right? So that's where they have traditionally that's where they've had their liberty. That's where they've had their that's where they planted their liberty flag, so to speak. However, if you started asking about moral rules like gay marriage or should prostitution be legal or drugs be legal, that's where the authoritarian comes out on them and says, well, those things are immoral. The government should stop those things. It's bad to inject heroin into your eyeballs. Therefore, heroin should be illegal and we should have a giant war on drugs, right? And so, and by the way, no one's
Into your
arguing that heroin's
eyeballs.
bad. Whatever. All right. No one's arguing. I've never injected heroin. I know it doesn't go into your eyeballs. But
Well, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, so like, that was they were willing to be authoritarians for kind of personal moral issues like that. And
Yeah.
that's why you saw a lot of family values type stuff in the moral majority in the 80s worried about things that pornography and stuff like that would affect family values. And from a cultural perspective, maybe rightly so worried about that, but willing to use the power of the state to enforce their morality. And then on the left, traditionally, you had people who were much more liberal in terms, like classically liberal in terms of their willingness to accept, to keep the state out of personal matters. So stay out of my bedroom, that kind of thing. We should be able to run naked down the streets, rubbing green jello all over our bodies or whatever. Like anything goes, morally, from a personal perspective.
I have more questions about your personal life later.
That was a reference to Demolition Man.
Yeah.
And but when it comes to like your wallet or corporations or the monetary system, well, you might be able to have sex with whomever you want, however you want, for money, but you always have to pay taxes on that. And actually, should be a minimum wage and blah, like, so very kind of open and free and libertine on the personal stuff, but not so much on economic issues. And typically, the way I've seen those matrices structured that try and place you on that scale, typically they just have policy questions that ask things like, should drugs be legal or not? And that puts you somewhere. And then like, should minimum wage? And they just ask policy questions around those categories, and that kind of pushes you into one quadrant or another. So that's kind of been the scale. But the thing that you notice about both, and the thing that I think, I'm going to use the word libertarian, but I mean small L libertarian. I certainly don't mean the Libertarian Party, but I mean the libertarian-minded people, liberty-minded people. The thing that they've been pushing on for decades is they've been trying to convince people on both sides, hey, the real debate to be had here is, do you want increased power for the state or not? Do you want the state to stay out of your life generally? Let's be consistent. If it's my body, my choice, then it should be my wallet, my choice, right? If that's your stance, if your stance is that I should be allowed to be a prostitute or I should be allowed to inject drugs into my body, well, then I should be able to take a job for below minimum wage or whatever I want, or I should be able to sell hot dogs on the corner without a license, right? Like all those economic activity things are also expressions of my liberty and my personal free will. So I think both the left and the right have never really been philosophically consistent at all. And from my perspective, there's not really philosophic roots or consistency to them. There's just a preference for, and this is probably based on psychology because I know there are psychological differences between the two. There's just a preference for which things they want to be busybodies about. And
Right.
then they use any sort of philosophy or religion as justification for why that's what they want to control, but not other stuff, right? And so the good Christians, obviously I'm an atheist. The good Christians, the ones I like, the ones I get along with, are the ones who use Christianity. They interpret Christianity as more of a Lockean sense. They interpret Christianity as being some sort of basis for individual rights, and they try and construct their politics around that. And then we can have conversations, because even though I disagree with their derivation of individual rights, at least they're starting from the individual rights standpoint, and it's easier to have conversations where we can agree about where to move society if we start with that standpoint. Whereas most fellow atheists really start more from like a Hegelian philosophy kind of thing, where or some kind of vague like the good of the many, or like some collective good kind of crap. And that just, as much as I think a rational individualist society is better than a Christian-based individual society, the Christian-based is still light years ahead of an atheist Marxist hellhole, which is what we get when you leave most atheists to their own devices. So that's a long-winded answer.
No, I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you think, I guess you've kind of the whole horseshoe thing then, do you see it as an actual, is that the shape that you kind of see between left and right? It goes down
No,
the
it's a
far, because
circle.
okay, so yeah,
It's
can
a
you
literal circle. I like if you said to me, "What's the difference
well,
between Stalin and Hitler?" I would be like,
yeah, so
justification?
I was gonna ask
Their
about that too, because
reasons?
it seemed like I don't know that, yeah, initially when I was trying to think about like left and right, I'm like, okay, well, if it were, maybe it was supposed to be like authoritarian to libertarian, like where left was supposed to be more authoritarian generally, going to the right is libertarian, so like so more freedom. But then I'm like, if and I'm still questioning on this, but like if fascism is supposed to be on the right, then obviously that doesn't make sense. So, but I don't really understand the difference then either between like fascism and other authoritarian ideas that are on either side. So
Yeah,
like
well, because they're both forms of authoritarian, right? And authoritarianism, and in fascism, I mean, this is why I think they're categorized on the right and left. In fascism, they tend to go after. They tend to first be willing to pronounce moral judgments on individual behavior, especially with. I mean, actually, sex is a great lens to view this through, frankly, because I think it's quite telling. And I think sex gets at some kind of inner feeling they have about controlling people and about the morality of people, or what people should be doing. So if you look
just to
like,
clarify, sexual intercourse, not
yeah,
sex as in gender sex.
yeah,
Okay.
although maybe that too, right? So if you look at the fascists, they're much more. When they start, they may end up very similar places, but their authoritarianism is often early on willing to start with things like, well, we have to restrict these sorts of sexual behaviors. So if you look at the Weimar Republic, one of the things that I think helped Hitler gain in popularity was the Weimar Republic was like the San Francisco bathhouses of the time, right? It was a free for all sexually. There was a lot of sexual activity happening out in the open, a lot of what we'd say deviant sexual activity, things that were against the norm. And so the fascists are willing to kind of start putting in laws around personal behavior of that sort. It's not just sex, but sex is just a great example, right? They're willing to come in and start saying, well, we need to curb this licentious behavior. And The left is not one. The left says no. That licentious behavior should be encouraged and maybe even rewarded. Certainly tolerated, maybe rewarded. It's the family that kind of needs to be destroyed. The state should be running the family, and so they won't attack those things. In fact, they'll do the opposite and let them, and kind of let them go. But what they will attack early on is finances. Right? They will be like, well,
Right.
I don't know if you should be allowed to hire someone that doesn't meet all these criteria, and you have to pay them this, and you have to do this, and blah, 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 and companies and corporations are bad, blah, 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 blah. And so they tend to come at this like, let's abolish the corporations. That's kind of their starting point. Let's abolish the corporations, and it's almost their starting point, and their goal, and they have this collectivist thing where no one should have any different, everyone should be the same, blah blah blah, and so they kind of end up with an authoritarian state that purports to be about making everyone equal in brotherly love, and the fascist ends up with an authoritarian state that purports to be about excellence and purity or something like that. But they're both basically the same thing at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, even in the communist, you can't, maybe you can have sex more freely, but even then, you can't have a family. You can't do the. There's certain kind of things they don't like you to do, like be married and have a family and be insular and like raise children in a traditional way. Like that's not allowed, right? So
Right.
it's not that it's not allowed, but it's discouraged greatly. So I don't know. I'm not an expert at those two systems, but I look at them and I say, well, they both end up with they both justify increased government authoritarian power through some means, and at the end, and they both involve central planning, right? They both involve some sort of central planning of the lives of people, be it economic or otherwise, and once you start doing that, because economics is not disconnected from real life. If it were, no one would care about the minimum wage if it was completely disconnected, because it would be just a theoretical thing. But the minimum wage matters because people need to eat and they need to buy food with what they earn, right? So economics is connected. So because no matter where you start, because all this is interconnected, because human life can't be distilled into like, well, we're gonna put their sexual lives over in this category and their work lives over here and their religious life here. You can't separate that. Humans are integrated wholes. So once you start being an authoritarian in one area, eventually what happens is it doesn't work. So you start spreading out your authoritarianism, and eventually you end up having this huge state and being an authoritarian in basically every area, which is how both of those regimes kind of end up, right? So I think that what I'm excited about right now, when I'm not depressed about an upcoming civil war, what I'm excited about is that people are actually stepping back, because the left has now said they've given up. Weirdly, the left has now given up on the traditional leftist liberty stuff, and they've just moved directly into the authoritarian quadrant, and they're like, yep, we're Marxists,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it's sent a lot of people reeling. A lot of people that thought they had some sort of liberty connection to the left are looking at it going, oh, wait a minute, we actually like Stalin now, basically, right? And
Which is why all
they
the
won't.
classical liberals and stuff are veering
Yeah, because they
off.
were duped into thinking that leftism was somehow some liberal thing, just as the people on the right are duped into thinking that conservatism is some sort of liberty thing, which it's not. And so I think now at least people are asking the question, and now's a great time to point out, hey guys, you got to switch glasses. Stop looking at this left and right dichotomy. That's not the dichotomy that matters. Clearly, if free speech now puts you on the right, clearly that wasn't the right dichotomy. Something's wacky, right? And so if someone who hasn't changed their position at all is now considered far right, who used to be considered on the left, which happens, that scale is breaking, and I think people are seeing that scale is breaking, and now's the time to kind of say, hey guys, let's have a conversation about authoritarianism versus liberty. Let's have that conversation.
Right.
And if we can have that conversation, I don't think we can save all of America, but maybe we'll get enough people to go, oh, you know what? I'm willing to do the liberty thing. Even if it means some people are going to do stuff I don't like. I'm willing to do the liberty thing. Let's do that. Even though I kind of wish there was a minimum wage, or even though I kind of wish there was drug laws, or even though whatever your pet thing is that you wish there was, if you're willing to give that up for liberty, and you see this as a libertarian versus authoritarian scale, then you're the kind of person that can build and help maintain Western civilization. And if you're not willing to give up your pet project of authoritarianism, your pet thing that you wish the government would crack down on everyone with, then you're either part of the detritus that's going to be swept away, or you're going to be part of the opposition to maintaining Western civilization. People are asking you about your beliefs, by the way, in chat, and since it is your show,
Oh, yeah. Oh, because I asked Jeff what his was, because he said he used to be an atheist. So right.
Everyone used to be an atheist. You're born an atheist.
Right. Religious wise, I just go by I'm non-religious. I do like to celebrate Christmas and Easter, but other than that, belief wise, I'm homeless. I'll say, because we've had that discussion too, as far as like what atheism and agnosticism and stuff means. So I'm up in the air.
I don't think we've had it on air. We've had it privately though.
Not on air, just private, but just in general. So like from that, I'm like, oh, I don't want to throw my hat into any one camp for that officially. But speaking of chat too, I didn't see if you put in on screen too, but I just wanted to thank Kent Onufrichik.
Yeah, go ahead. Read them. I'll put them up.
He says, nothing to say besides happy to see you both again, and happy to see you. Thank you for joining us. Every time I see that it's Canada dollars, since it says CA, I keep thinking it's California. And so like, how come there are any other, how do you get a state to do it?
Soon we'll have our own currency. It will be called, it'll be called RMB.
And then Tax Terra says, I'm playing Settlers with my boys and I have a sheep port. Yes, that's a good one. Get all those sheep that you can. I usually just put a fence, if they're close together, then I just put this like mega fence around all of the sheep and build my settlements there and get the sheep port. So do you think that then that having like the certain things of authoritarianism, like fascism and on the right, do you think those are fairly labeled between left and right? Okay.
Because Antifa is fascist. I mean, look at the left today. They're literal fascists. Right? So they're not. They're not properly labeled. And I think that's the great lie that we've been fed and generations have been fed. Right? If you can frame the question wrong, then no one ever asks the questions you don't want them to ask. Like if you can frame the whole debate in a way where no one asks the right question, you win. And that's what's happened. We've had people who want ever-expanding government and authoritarianism have been able to, they've maybe intentionally, but they've been able to frame the entire debate around left versus right. Oh, fascism's over here and communism is over here. And it basically means that no matter which direction we slide, we get authoritarianism. So...
Okay, can we then go through, since we've talked about too offline of like, people don't really know, like they use the word to say like, I'm this thing, but then you'll be like, well, you don't actually know what that means. Can we kind of go through and sort of help define at least what your 100% correct factual opinion is on certain terms?
Yeah, sure. Although I think my answer is going to be depressing to you, but or maybe trivial, but go ahead, pick a term.
Okay. We'll just start with, let's define liberal and then conservative. We'll just start there.
Right. I don't think anyone can define liberal or conservative, and that's the problem. That's my trivial answer. Well, right.
Is that what you say, that you can't define it either? Like if you were that.
I could try. I could give proxies.
There isn't
right?
one.
People will try and give proxies for conservatism. Oh, conservatism means, and they'll talk about what I just talked about. Well, they want more free enterprise, and but they want to conserve some social issues, and some people talk about conservatism that way. Some people will talk about conservatism in a more sociological sense, where they'll say, well, conservatism means conserving the current system in some way and being slow to change. Right, that's how they'll define conservatism. I think both of those are fine. The problem is when someone says I'm a conservative, it doesn't transmit enough information for you to understand what they actually think about a variety of things, and there's not principled stances. So you
So the
end up,
umbrellas are just too
conservatives
big
have,
for those.
look, what?
It's just like the umbrella for like, because there's so many aspects underneath
Because you're told you have to pick
conservatism.
one side or the other, which is not true.
Yeah.
So, and you look at the left and you're like, well, I'm not that. And I think things are pretty reasonable. Let's not change things too much, so I'm a conservative or whatever it is. But I mean, look at what the quote conservatives have done. They have, every time they get in office, I don't know if they're having a contest with the left about how much money they can spend, but like they do not slow spending at all. Right. And, they'll have their victory is like, we cut the increase in growth by 2%. Like, so there's still an increase in growth. What the hell are you conserving? They don't conserve anything, but they certainly talk as if they care about conserving things. And what they do, and Michael Malice has this point, and I think this is a great way to describe conservatism. Conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. They go the same direction. They just go there slowly. That's all they do. Right. They go there slowly. And that's the big disappointment. And I know not every conservative will agree, and some conservatives will say, well, if I were elected, I would reduce taxes and reduce spending and blah. Well, maybe that's true, but none of the people in your club that ever have power to ever do that. So,
and I think it's because other people, like you say that, well, conservatism, is it conservatism? Whatever. Conservatives, they're like, oh, they don't believe in this, like they don't believe in authority, like I wouldn't do, I know that, but I've seen plenty online who do have certain authority. So I think it's just, if everyone thinks that this is what it means to be conservative or liberal, and then if you're not doing that, then you're the other thing, even if they both agree, if all sides agree on it. So I think it's just, that's why it's just too loose that people don't know, or that I think you need to just be specific. I personally, and I've talked to a friend about this before, how we would like to give up parties completely and just go by policy, though. If we're going to be voting on things, like I'd rather not vote on like this underneath this party, here are my candidates. I'd rather just see like, okay, like you have the policies that align with my beliefs more, and I'd rather just be able to vote for anyone, and just getting rid of I don't know. I think labels are good to have when you're trying to define and separate something so people understand what you're talking about. But when the labels aren't defined well, then it's like, what's the point of even having them?
You do know something about someone who's conservative, who defines themselves as conservative versus liberal. Someone in chat is saying conservatism is a spectrum, liberalism is a spectrum, socialism is a spectrum. So they're just deconstructing everything, which is not helpful. Sure. Everything's a spectrum. Done. Now, can we not have a conversation? Like, they do have the labels do have value because they do correspond to something, right? They do, you're less likely to be eating soy if you're a conservative, and less likely to be eating red meat if you're a leftist. Now, does that mean all leftists are soy boys with buns? No, but there's clearly correlation. That's a silly example, but there are correlations, right? Someone on the right is much more likely to, let's say, oppose increase in funding for the National Endowment for the Arts. Someone on the left is much more likely to say, yes, we should have that. We should increase it. I'm not saying the labels are completely meaningless, but they're not principle-based, which is why they don't really do a lot of value to. They don't really help in pushing culture one way or another. I don't think so. I view conservatives as Michael Malice says, progressives driving the speed limit. And in my lifetime, which is 40 plus years, I haven't seen them conserve anything. I don't know what's really been conserved. The good ones have pushed back on some people who wanted to step on the gas pedal. So that's good. I appreciate it. But, it doesn't. There's not really a principled stance there. And the same with the left. The liberals, again, liberal, people say, well, I'm a liberal. What does that mean? Right? When I was growing up, here's what conservative and liberal meant. At least in my, colloquially. You were a Republican, but if you were very much a Republican, you were conservative. And you were a Democrat, but if you were very much a Democrat, you were a liberal. That was it. That was it. That's what it meant. It meant like, I'm very
What does that
Democrat
mean?
or I'm very Republican.
To be very that you're just
Were
more
if you were
political
pulling the
or
Republican Party more to the quote classic right, you were conservative. If you were pulling the Democrat Party more to the classic left, you were a liberal. And if you were just kind of a milk toast one, you were just a Democrat or a Republican, right? So of course now, if you're not a radical Marxist, you're alt right, and everything's messed up. Which is why we can have these conversations and people will listen. But I don't. This is why I don't like these terms, and I don't like the terms because they are used. This is why they're kind of messy. They're used to subsume an ad hoc set of beliefs that aren't based on principles, but are different from someone else's ad hoc set of beliefs. So, it's like what's the fundamental difference between saying the government can control what substance you put in your body, and the government can control how you spend your money? I mean, where's the philosophical reason for opposing one but not the other, and supporting the other? I don't. There's not a reason for this. So I think people just have things they like and just throw themselves into one camp. This is not thought through. None of this is thought through. These are just evolved. It's just like teams. It's like, why is someone a Denver Broncos team? Because they grew up in Colorado. There's not like a reason. There's not a reason generally.
Generally. I was going to say that my boyfriend, he likes the previously Oakland Raiders, now Vegas Raiders, because of that one Super Nintendo sports game that he played growing up because he's from Pennsylvania. But do you think it's worthwhile to actually have these to maybe continue to use, like, what would you want to try to do though? Like, continue using these if they're kind of, they're mixed, they're muddled and stuff already though? Would it be better to try to spread the word of like, here's how we want to define them, or just
I would rather just change the conversation to like labels that mean on this end of the authoritarian spectrum and on the other end of the authoritarian spectrum, right?
Start new labels to try.
I mean, they could be reused old labels if you want, but I think that's a lot harder. So,
I agree.
You could do it that way. If all the conservatives were like, I mean, and maybe you see some of this happening. You see the Republican Party of today as actually much more liberal than the Republican Party was on social issues than they were 30 years ago. So, the problem is they're also more liberal on every other issue. It's not like they only moved socially liberal. They just moved liberal generally. They just moved liberal, right? It's not like, look at the conversations, even the good, quote, good conservative senators like Ted Cruz, right? I watched some of the Amy Coney Barrett hearing this morning. And Cruz, I like Cruz generally. Like he's generally pretty good, but even Cruz was saying things like, "Well, no one in the Senate wants to not protect pre-existing conditions and blah 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 blah." Now, since when would a conservative think that the government has any right to do fuck all with healthcare? Right? Where's the guy from 30 years ago who would say, "Actually, I don't think the Republicans in this room don't think the government should have anything to do with healthcare, so we want to get the hell out, or we don't want to enter." Right? No, they never get out of anything. Conservatives slow the entrance, but then never actually exit once it's been entered. So, even the good ones are kind of having a conversation where they've conceded the point that the government belongs in healthcare in some major way, and they just have a better central planned idea than the Democrats. And that's a losing argument. There's nothing compelling about that argument. That's like, my shade of red is better than his shade of blue. It's not compelling, right? No one is standing up and saying we should never have been here. The government was the problem from day one with healthcare. It shouldn't be tied to your place of employment. That's because of the government. Everything we've done in healthcare, almost everything we've done in healthcare, pharmaceutical problems that we've got, all this crap is because of government interference. Our health as Americans is related to government crop subsidies. It's related to government the regulation with pharmaceuticals. It's related to a massive government regulation around healthcare and everything else and insurance. and taxes, and there is so much crap here that what we need to do is get rid of it all and let the free market run healthcare. Get rid of, the AMA wants to limit the number of physicians and have special licenses because God forbid you don't go through their schools, and we have more doctors. They want to make sure that there's a limited supply so that doctors can make more money. I mean, all this is bullshit. This is all, the state involved in an industry that they shouldn't be involved in any industry, but the state involved in the industry, the state has created all these problems, and even the conservatives have conceded the point that the federal government's role somehow this federal government somehow has a role to play in healthcare. And so if you're a conservative who's been around for the past 20 or 30 years, you got to be asking yourself, what the hell have you been conserving? Because even your good guys concede that point.
All right, we got Carter riled up.
Well, I mean, look, politics gets me pissed off, which is why I try to pay no attention to it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, so I think people should do, especially people on the right, I'm using right loosely, people who are now in the wrong think category, which is probably most of the people that watch this show. You should really stop back. You should ask yourself a question. Are you willing to give up whatever little thing that you think the government does that you benefit from? Either do you think is morally good or whatever. Are you willing to give that up? To take a deep breath and let go and let other people do stupid, wrong, bad things, so long as everything else is given up? So long as you don't have to support them in their bad decisions? So long as all the things that you wish weren't there also went away? That's what it means to be an individualist. That's what it means. Rugged individualism means, you know what? That person injecting heroin into their eyeballs across the street, you might minister to them. You might try and convince them. You might say, if you do that, you can't work for me, or you can't hang out with my kids, or you might try and offer them help. You might start a GoFundMe for them to get them help. But you don't outlaw heroin, and you don't enable a massive police state with tanks to go no-knock warrant raids on them. You don't do that. And if you can't let that go, then you're not ready for liberty. You're just not. And you just admit that to yourself. You're not ready for liberty. Because that's what liberty looks like. Liberty looks like letting go of the fact that your neighbor is fucking up his life. That's what it looks like.
Would you be more willing to keep a government going if we just kind of started with a blank slate, like we got rid of everything and started with a blank slate as far as the rules and stuff and the authoritarianism that we have on it, and we just, because I was thinking about how like certain laws have come into effect over history with like seatbelt laws and other things like that too.
There's such dumb laws, right? Seatbelt laws. I mean, is there anything less principled than a seatbelt law?
So, and when I was younger, I thought it was more important. Like personally, I think the driver like of the car, if that's what they want, like it's their car. Like when I drive, I make everyone wear their seatbelt because I've rolled my car down a hill before and it's like flipped upside down. So the seatbelt's probably
sure.
safest.
No, I'm a seatbelt Nazi in my car because it's my car.
Right. But I don't force other people to do it. And when I was younger, they kind of taught you that like, oh, you wearing a seatbelt will save other people too. And I think I was unclear. And obviously, I was like, are we just flying out of the car if we wreck, and then your body like hits someone else's car and hurts? So that's kind of what my mentality was before too. I'm like, I guess it's helping, but since then I've been like, no, it's on the person. Like if they choose, what they do in their car is their business, and I don't think it's really going to affect other people. But so there are laws like that, and just in general too, where it seems like, oh, this will make people safer. If we enforce these rules and laws, then they won't be able to hurt themselves anymore. So if we take out those,
right? Well, because this is being a farm animal, right? This is like there was a meme going around today that I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Sally Mayweather. I'm not sure who was sending the meme around, but it was like a lion in a cage, and it was a lion like on the plains, and it was like, okay, well, the lion on the left in the cage has free healthcare, free food, secure, blah blah blah. What do you want to be? The lion on the right has no assurances that he's going to live to see another day. Which do you want, right? And I think that's the litmus test. And I see a couple people in chat saying like, "Well, I don't want to live next to a heroin addict." Yeah, I don't either. No one wants to live next to maybe another heroin addict, but you don't have to live next to a heroin addict. Just because there's not a law doesn't mean you can't have social ostracism and things that basically make it difficult for some. I don't want to live next to a freaking Antifa person, but I probably do, given where I live, right? Like, there's lots of people I don't want to live next to, and someone else was like, "Well, heroin's expensive. I don't want to have the incentive to steal my shit." Heroin's expensive because the government's outlawed it. That's why it's expensive, right? And there's the idea that, do you think before the war on drugs you were all living next to heroin addicts? I'm sorry. In Leave It to Beaver, where there was like Eddie Haskell, a heroin addict. I mean, he was a jerk, but he wasn't a heroin addict.
Right. If anything, he was probably on cocaine with how excitable he was.
Right. I mean, look, this isn't. You don't need the government to do this stuff. I will concede one thing, which is culturally there has been moral decay in our society. Culturally, it's been we've decayed to the point where there are more likely to be heroin addicts rather than just Eddie Haskells, right? Or
why do you think that is? Do you think that's from the more social?
Yeah, no, we can talk about why that is, but I will say, because that is the case, people are turning to the government to try and fix that problem, and that won't work. That won't work. It won't work. I know you want it to work. It's not going to work. You can't fix the heroin addict with the war on drugs. You can't do it. You've got to fix the culture. That's where you should be focusing on. Because no one in my life that I know, like, is not a heroin addict because of the law. Do you know people who aren't injecting heroin because it's illegal? I know no one who's not injecting it. Like, I don't know anyone who's like, well, I would be doing heroin, but it's illegal. No one.
I mean, and that's a lot of stuff too. Like, where if guns are illegal, and to own, like Chicago, you can't have them in any stores and things and stuff too, though. But does that stop the criminals? Like, if they want to have them, like, it being illegal isn't going to stop them, or else these laws and the no gun signs would actually do something.
Right. So now your question is like, why did society fall apart?
Yeah.
Man, that's a huge question. And I don't know the full answer, but I can give my high level answer of a couple contributing factors. One of the contributing factors, which the Christians in the audience will like, is the loss of Christianity. It was the tearing down of the church and the replacement with absolutely nothing. Now, I'm an atheist. I do think that I know that one can derive objective moral laws and codes of behavior without the belief in a supernatural entity. I also know it's not that difficult to do. However, no one bothered to have that discussion. The only atheists who tried to talk about morals were ones who were either basing their morals on like a Hegelian state worship type of thing where they replaced the state. They got rid of God and replaced the state. Or there were ones who were just completely nihilistic or hedonistic. And then there was the humanists who kind of had this vague, which is this vague notion that, well, the most good for the most people, which is the most non-philosophical statement you can make. And they pretend that that's a very educated and enlightened statement to make, but it's a meaningless statement philosophically. So you basically have crap that was, you tore down the church and you replaced it with a pile of garbage. And so, well, garbage begets garbage. That's where we are, right? And so I don't think the church in and of itself is a safeguard, because the Catholic Church the Catholic scholar invented the concept of social justice. There are many people who use their religion to push socialism, including the Pope. So I don't think a Christian religion is a guarantee, but If it's the flavor of the Christian religion, if it's the interpretation of Christianity that's more, again, as I said before, Lockean interpretation, that goes a long way. That's certainly much better than what we've got. But so look, I think we did that. And the other two major things I'll say that we did. So one was the destruction of the church, which I do think has been absolutely horrible. One was we stupidly turned to Germans and German philosophers, European philosophers in general, but German philosophers, some French in the later, but earlier on, mostly German philosophers, that we turned to crappy philosophy to populate our university philosophy departments with, because we wanted to be grown up like Europe. We were like, well, we're just kind of a teenage country. We're kind of a bunch of rebels. We're not sophisticated. We don't know which fork to use. And look at them over in Europe. They've got all this history and aristocracy, and they're fancy. So let's import some fancy philosophers from Europe. And we did that. And those fancy philosophers brought with them an intellectual cancer, which is collectivism in many forms, and they have many justifications. Everyone from, Kant to Derrida has some way to justify anti-individualism, and they brought this in, and it came. You could say it came to a peak, although I think it's still maybe even peaking. But like, you had various movements of this. You had. And a lot of people talk about Gramsci and then the Frankfurt School, and then people talk about postmodernism. All those things, one begets another. They're all children of philosophical ancestors who were pretty horrible. So instead of turning to the philosophic founders of the country and saying, hey, what is it about the Enlightenment philosophers that really helps to make America special and unique and prosperous and successful? Where did they get these ideas? And let's populate our university with those ideas. What they did was they said, let's get some Germans, because Germans are cool. And I mean, really, it was that dumb. And they relied on, a version of the Prussian education system to model our education. So we populated universities with that. We let the government take over education. Really bad idea. Really fucking horrible idea. Never, ever let the government touch education. Never, ever. There's no justification for it, ever. No reason you could possibly think of justifies the damage that a government will do if you let them touch education. But we did. And so here we go. Our schools slowly turned into government indoctrination camps designed to perpetuate a state and bureaucracy, and designed to create little citizens who would do what was good, or do the bidding, not what was good, but what the bidding of the state. And I'm not saying that in a conspiratorial way. It just happens naturally. Right? No teacher who's employed by the state is going to explain to their students why it's not the responsibility of the state to tax your parents to pay me my salary. No one will ever do that. You can't go there. You can't have that discussion. No public school teacher is going to explain that their job should not exist. So you've opened Pandora's box, and you've given your children over to the enemy. And so you've tore down the church. You gave up your education system. And I think, and then the financial sector, which I know Carrie doesn't like to talk about, but we gave up the financial system to an oligarchy, right? We created the Federal Reserve.
Sister.
Huh?
Yeah. You said financial sister.
The financial sister. The financial system to the Federal Reserve. We gave it over to basically an oligarchy. And slowly, eventually, they weaned us from the gold standard, and now we literally have funny money and all of that. People get bored about economics. Well, go ahead.
I'm unclear with the history. Can you dive into that a little bit too?
They created the Federal Reserve in 1913, and
right.
And then they slowly pushed to have the dollar backed by less and less gold, and it was Nixon actually that completely severed us from the gold standard in the late 60s, maybe.
Yeah.
Why?
I think at least. Yeah.
Well, there were lots of justifications, but the why is, if you don't have to have gold backing each dollar, we can write as much checks as we want. We can write as many checks as we want. That's why. Politicians get elected by promising you shit, and shit costs money. And if they can have a blank check, if they can just write more crap, borrow more, write more crap, whatever, then they can promise you stuff, and you're not paying for it. They're not paying for it. Actually, your grandchildren and your great grandchildren are paying for it. So that's what
And
that's and go ahead.
they were aware. They knew that going in. Did they recognize like, hey, by doing this, we are screwing over our descendants?
I think the bad ones did. I think many of them, Kerry would call them tools. Like someone said it was early 70s. I thought it was late 60s or early 70s when Nixon got us off the gold standard. I couldn't remember. Thank you. Someone said it was early 70s. They. Sorry, I got distracted. I read a chat message. What was your question?
That's my problem too.
Sorry, what was your question? I got distracted.
We're talking about why they the descendant, did they know that they were doing something bad?
No, I think the bad ones did. I think Keynes knew, Maynard Keynes knew, I think, because he made off the cuff comments about like, well, in the end we're all dead. I don't really, like, he didn't care.
Oh, so it's just if it benefits me right now in my lifetime, then I'm happy with it.
I think some of the bad ones knew damn well, and I didn't. Yeah, so some of the bad ones knew damn well. I think there's just a lot of tools though. Right, there's just a lot of politicians who, like AOC, right? Doesn't she have like a quote degree in quote economics, which is laughable, right? So, some tweed jacket professor explains something that she doesn't quite understand, but sounds like you can print money forever and everything's fine, and she just goes, "Okay, I understand economics now," and like, done, great, that's what I wanted. You gave me some justification for a blank check, thank you, done. They don't really dig into it. They don't really, it doesn't matter because they never have to pay the piper, because that you can kick the can so far down the road that some later generation has to deal with it. And so, if you're having kids now, it's your kids who are going to deal with it, right? I mean, like we're
right.
I don't know. I hate when people try and predict when things are going to collapse because it's really hard to predict the timing and it's always wrong. But I mean, I'm confident enough that if you're having kids now, they will live to see the collapse of the monetary system, or the complete collapse of the dollar. Absolutely.
So why do you keep pushing me to have kids?
Well, because we need good kids. Just because the dollar's going to collapse doesn't mean they can't be Bitcoin rich or something else. Have them buy gold, right? Yeah, so someone says, Keynes explained that the Fed would fall apart, but it would take generations. Right, that's what I mean. Keynes is in the camp of the bad people who knew. Right? He was like, oh, yeah, but in the end, we're all dead. It'll take generations. It'll fall apart, but, it's good for now. My job's done. So, and the idea to people now, this is the thing. I know talking about money bores people, but you got to get past that because money is, I think it's intentional that it bores people because it bores you because that's where you should look. That's exactly where you should look. The boring nature is the camouflage. That's where the problem is. That's where all the evils are. I mean, not all of them. That's where a lot of them start. They can't do shit without, like, money is the root of the price of everything. It's the price of money is the price of everything. He who controls the money controls the entire economy. Everything is controlled by money. So if you want to whine about people don't have food or clothing or healthcare or blah, 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 but you don't want to talk about the financial system, you are spinning your wheels and you're playing the wrong game. You shouldn't even be involved in the conversation. It all starts with the money. The price of money is of utmost importance and the control of that money. And so if you care about people, you gotta care about the financial system. That's where it starts. That's why Ron Paul, he didn't care about auditing the Fed or ending the Fed because he was some financial wonk. The guy was an obstetrician. He cared about people. He just knew the connection. He knew that there was this boring, dark, obtuse thing that no one wanted to look at, that seems really boring, and who wants to talk about it, that is the heart of the evil that's being propagated on people's lives. And, I think one of the greatest tricks that they have played is to get people to have their eyes glaze over when financial conversations happen and no one cares about the Federal Reserve. That's one of the most devastating blows to your ability to unravel this that you can accept.
Well, Lady Della. I'm still unclear how to pronounce those first three letters.
Lady Della.
Della. She says, "Talking about money doesn't bore us, Carter. Keep it coming." Um,
It bores some
so I
people.
think that, and I think so. Maybe you just need to talk more about it. You either need to like throw in some jokes as you do it, or just I think talking about how
I
much
know.
it's
There's very little
ruining.
funny about this, but yeah.
You're like, well, yeah, you just need to throw in some like numbers jokes, or yeah, or just talk about how it's ruining people's lives. Like give like here's how it sucks, and I think that might help too for people like, oh, this is affecting me, and like, and this is why things are tough for me. So then maybe that will keep people drawn too.
Yeah. I mean, look. Why is college? Why is education gone up in colleges? Well, there's a few reasons. Obviously, they've got hundreds of bureaucrats now at colleges who are worried about what gender you are. But the other reason is they're heavily subsidized now. The government pays for everyone to go to college. So, I mean, there's other reasons. It's not the only reason. But one of the things, it's like, okay, well, you subsidize it if you understand uh, if you understand basic economics. You give an 18-year-old $100,000 that, oh, it's a loan, but he doesn't understand, and he's not gonna worry about paying that back. He's only gonna wake up in cold sweats when he's 35 and hasn't paid his loans off. But when he's 18, he doesn't care. So, oh, it's free money.
Yeah,
Woohoo. Or
I
even if
feel
you give him a
that.
grant, it's free. I'm getting some money. So he goes to college. Well, look, what do you think the college is going to do? They can charge more because he's not spending his own money. He doesn't give a fuck. No one is shopping around no one cares. Well, for every dollar I spend on this education, am I really getting value? They're not analyzing it that way. You hear parents talk about like, well, you needed a degree as a minimum standard for what? I don't know, being a barista at Starbucks. Oh, well, there's an experience that comes with college. Is it worth $100,000? Is that the experience you're talking? Like, are frat parties worth 100K in loans? Like, they don't. No one is looking at it because it's not their fucking money. It's not
I don't
their
even
money.
know where I heard as far as like college and stuff goes. So that because my dad didn't push me. He wasn't someone who said like you need to go to college and do this though. But I felt that I felt like it was something that I needed to
Well, your
do, and
school
I
will
guess
tell
it
you
was just from
that.
school. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I think and
Society.
I've told you this before too, is that I only had one semester of economics throughout all of high school, and so like I don't really know that much about it at all. And
Well, so that's the other thing. Think about this. Again, government schools. If when you're 18, you're going to have to make a major financial decision about taking on triple digit, well, triple digit in the K, right? So 6-digit debt potentially with interest. Don't you think that they should have at least taught you enough about basic finance that you could make that decision, with some sort of level of reasoned acuity, right? Shouldn't you have some ability to make that decision rationally in your best interest? But they don't do that. They don't teach you that. All they teach you is, well, you better get a college degree because if you don't have a college degree, and they throw these stats out like, well, people with college degrees earn blankety
yeah.
blank more. Yeah, that's not even necessarily true. It's an apples to oranges comparison. They don't factor in the fact that someone else starts 4 years earlier in their career. It's also based on old data. When college degrees were more valuable. Again, supply and demand. The more college degrees that are out there, the less valuable each college degree is. So getting a
Right.
degree in gender studies is
But people
literally
didn't learn that because
worthless.
they don't know economics.
Right. So, you've got all this crap. Someone else in chat I saw earlier mentioned inflation. Inflation's another one, right? Inflation's another one that just people just they have these like,
How?
well, let's just print money. What's so wrong with printing money? We're just kicking the can down the road. Okay. Inflation is a tax on the poorest people in society. And if you purport to care about poor people, you should be fighting tooth and nail against every dollar expenditure that relies on printing money because it's an almost immediate tax on the poorest in society. And here's how, if you don't understand that.
I don't.
Again, the law of supply and demand. Interestingly enough, money follows the same law of supply and demand, just as goods. So, if there's $10 trillion in circulation, each dollar is worth a certain amount in real value. You can buy a certain amount of bread with each dollar. If there's $100 trillion in circulation, it's worth a tenth of that amount. You can buy a tenth of that amount of bread because dollars aren't worth as much. Now, we're also in a system where dollars aren't actually technically worth anything because it's all funny money. It's not backed by gold, blah, blah, blah. We can get into that. But let's just talk about the inflation only. So, okay. So when a senator stands up and says, we're going to help we're going to relieve people, we're going to do COVID relief, and we're going to, I don't know what their current thing is, another trillion or $2 trillion, $4 trillion, I don't know what the number is. Some trillions of dollars thing they want to put out. Now, by the way, again, let's point out that these are the people who created the economic problem that they're now purporting to solve, right? They're the ones who shut things down. Okay, they're the ones who told you couldn't open your business, so now you need money. Now they're going to solve it, and how they're going to solve it is they're going to print some money. Let's assume that they're going to print it. They could borrow it. Borrowing it just actually will probably amount to printing it for your grandkids, but way more because there'll be interest. So borrowing it's not better. Let's assume they print it. They'll print your money, and nowadays printing is just they type some digits into a ledger. They print your money, and that money now dilutes the value of every dollar that's out. Just does, by definition, dilutes the value of the dollars. And so now, the thing that cost the bread that cost $1 now maybe costs $1.10. Maybe that's not a lot, but 10% increase or whatever it is, that would be 10% inflation. And Jeff Bezos doesn't give a shit because he spends so little of his money on living expenses that a 10% increase in the cost of his living expenses, like what? So he pays his bottle of wine is 10% more. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter to the ultra wealthy. You can inflate all day. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because most of his money is not spent on that stuff. And he's not just keeping it in a bank dealing with the inflation problem. He's got financial wizards who are making sure to hedge his inflation bets and moving it to different currencies and buying gold and buying Bitcoin and buying companies, stocks and companies. Like, he doesn't give a shit about the inflation. The inflation doesn't hurt him one iota. But the guy living paycheck to paycheck in a the janitor in an inner city living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to put food on his table, that hurts. And it's a lasting effect. It's not a temporary hurt. It's not like it doesn't hurt in the same way that the COVID check feels good when you get it, because that's a one-time hit and it's over. It hurts forever. It's a permanent increase.
But with inflation though too, doesn't jobs and stuff start paying a little more, right? Just because of generally.
So the price of everything theoretically goes up. Yeah, the price of everything theoretically goes up. Yep.
But I guess that might.
But that takes longer.
Later
on, jobs take longer. Yeah.
Right. So, but so theoretically, when that does,
it could even out theoretically.
But in that immediate time,
right? But think about who it hurts. Also, though, it also hurts savers who do put money in the bank or who just save in your nest egg, because your nest egg is now worth less than it was before because you've inflated it away. So, it would hurt Bezos if he just stuck his money in a bank and sat there. He would be very against inflation because it would hurt the spending power of his money sitting in a bank. Now, if you've got a team of financial wizards who are hedging your bets on inflation and making sure your money isn't affected by inflation, then you don't care about it. But the average person who's been saving up for something and they've got $10K in the bank or whatever it is they haven't actually, the average person probably has a negative bank balance, but whatever. They've got $10K in the bank. They've been saving up. They've been scrimping and saving. And they're not using that money in a way to hedge against dollar inflation because they're normal people. It just hurts them. It just hurts them. It's not an even Steven, like, well, I get my raise eventually and everything evens out. That money that you saved up in the bank is always worth less. You just made it worth less. And even if you have it sitting in a money market account, that may not be managed in a way to hedge inflation very well. And you might not even notice. Maybe you were going to make 3% and you made 2.3%. Like, okay, well, And that compounds over time, and your retirement is worse, and like all this stuff matters. But it's so hidden from the average person that no one cares about it, and politicians can just gloss over it and say that you're being wonkish and boring to talk about finances, and we need something now. We need to help people now. Let's not worry about whether they make blah 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 or this happens in 10 years or blah, blah, blah. They need help now, which is hedonistic. If you don't recognize that, that's utter hedonism. So, you know, someone asked me what the solution is. I mean, look, monetarily, the solution is to have ultimately, the monetary solution is to have a free market in money, which might blow some minds. That's the ultimate solution. But you could just go back to the gold standard, and that will be helpful. If you were on the gold standard, the problem with the gold standard from a politician perspective is they can't spend money they don't have because they can't print money because they need gold to back the money. So you can't print gold. You can't just type gold into a ledger and like have gold, right? That was the reason that the gold standard kept the government in check, right? Because you can't do it.
Going back into it, well, how would that affect like where we're at now with how much money we've printed and how far off from the gold standard? How would trying to put that?
Well, we would have, let's say we have, I actually think we're lying to the entire world about how much money we have in Fort Knox, how much gold we have in Federal Reserve. Theoretically, there's, or the Treasury. Theoretically, there's gold, but I think we are lying. So, whatever amount that is, you pick a day and you say, all right, every dollar is backed by gold. It's the number of dollars divided by the ounces of gold we have. That's what it is, dollar per ounce. The end. That's our monetary supply.
So it's just really based on the literal amount of gold.
That's what we got.
That we have. Okay.
Yep. And to do it, and they did it with silver for a little while, but you used to be able to go in and it used to say your dollar. This is why they're not called dollars anymore. If you read them, they say Federal Reserve notes, right? Because they're not. They used to be claims on actual things. You used to be able to take your dollar in and say, I want however many ounces of silver this dollar represents. I want it. It's like, give me the silver. Here's the piece of paper. Give me my fucking silver, right? And they had to do that. They had to give you your silver. So you could do that. You could say, give me my gold. And that prevents them from being able to just print money because they have to be able to give you your gold if you walk in and ask for it. And I believe that the U.S. has lied to a bunch of other countries. So World War II prompted a lot of other countries to store their gold in the U.S. vaults. And then the U.S. became the reserve currency, which is a blessing in disguise for us because us being the reserve currency meant we're allowed to kind of print in ways that would normally be a lot more inflationary in the short term, but get away with it because other countries take the hit for us. So, but eventually that can't last eventually. So like China could collapse the dollar tomorrow if they wanted to. They would hurt themselves as much. I think they would hurt us more. I'm not a economics expert in terms of, the macroeconomics of China and the U.S., but I'm pretty sure they would hurt us more than they would hurt themselves. But they could collapse the dollar immediately if they wanted to. And I think that China knows this, and I think that they are not averse to the idea. They've been collecting gold. They've been out buying gold for the past several years. And there's a guy named Jim Rickards who wrote a book called what's the name of Jim Rickards' book? Does anyone remember? It's like
Same.
I'm just gonna look it up because I really it's a great book. And Currency Wars. That's the book. He's written a bunch of books, but the one I'm thinking of is Currency Wars. And I guess another one is The Death of Money, the Coming Collapse of the International Monetary System. Anyway, in Currency Wars, he describes a scenario in which he was asked by the U.S. government to kind of play these war games, but financial war games. And his team got disqualified because he did something that the people in charge, I guess, in the U.S., I don't know if it was a DOD thing, it might have been, decided could never happen. but it was catastrophic to the U.S. And what his team did was I think they had Russia and China collude on buying gold and collude against the U.S. And I think if I remember, and so I think they disqualified his team for that because they were like, well, that would never, you can't, that would never happen. You can't do that. No. We don't have to worry about that. No, right. They didn't want to hear it. It was like, literally, they were like, I'm not listening. And stamped their feet and kicked him out. So he wrote a book called Currency Wars. But a lot of the stuff that he predicted is starting to happen. And we know China's been around buying gold.
So someone asked earlier too, Jeff had asked what your thoughts are on UBI, Universal Basic Income. And I know what your answer is going to be, but if you want to talk a bit about that.
I think you know my philosophical answer, but I think maybe the question will be about like a practical answer, maybe? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, you can delve into both.
Obviously, philosophically, it's atrocious. It's it's philosophically horrible.
So why philosophically
I don't think I need to make that.
Though?
Oh, I do need to make that argument?
I don't know. Just as a quick, just for those who do need it.
Because theft is immoral. Look, you can't.
Okay.
If you have a right to life, which you do, natural law, not from the government. You don't get a right to life from the Constitution. If you have a right to life, then the corollary is you have a right to take actions and make decisions that you believe in your best judgment are in accordance with living your life. And the only caveat is you can't do things that violate other people's right to life. And so that's where you get into this negative rights idea where it's like, okay, well, I can do stuff, but I can't do stuff that would violate someone else's right. And we don't have to go through the entire concept of rights, but at a high level, as it pertains to UBI, there are, I guess, I can think of 3 ways, maybe there's more, but I can think of 3 ways to get UBI. One is you tax people. Well, that means that you give guns to one group of people, i.e. the tax authorities, and you force at gunpoint other people to give up their money to put into your collection basket, and you will therefore then distribute it to other people. Well, that's theft. I'm sorry that people don't like the trivial maxim that taxation is theft, but it is. Taxation is theft. So it's theft. That's theft. So you don't, just because a bunch of people vote to take my money and give it to you doesn't mean that you somehow get magical morals come out of that. So I know you like taxes, and I know you want to be able to do that, and you want to be able to justify it so you can say, well, that's totally different. How dare you say that? But you're just wrong. It's still theft. No matter how many of you vote for it, it's theft. So
Carter's saying that in the you and the general because I don't like taxes.
Right, yeah.
I'm very
so it's yeah, I know you don't, right? So it's just theft. Okay. So you can steal it. All right? That makes it immoral. You could borrow it as a government. You could borrow it. But how do you pay it back? Through theft. So that's theft. You could inflate. But how do you inflate? Well, in order to inflate, you have to basically be controlling the monetary system. To control the monetary system, you have to outlaw other forms of currency, right? Like you can't, I don't know if you know this, but you and I can't just decide, you and I can't make Carter's dollars backed in gold and start conducting transactions in them without looping the state in and paying taxes. It's illegal.
I think you mentioned something like that, and yeah, I was surprised.
We can't do that. We're not allowed to do that. Technically, bartering, we should be paying taxes, right? So we are not allowed to come up with an alternate system. So that also, again, it involves force, it involves violation of rights to prevent us from actually having voluntary transactions with one another. So no matter how you slice it, the resources for UBI necessarily come through the initiation of the use of force at the hands of the state. They do. So, that's why it's immoral. I have heard arguments about UBI being better than welfare.
Real quick, sorry. Joe Hammer 79 says, what about shroot bucks? I think Shroot Bucks
Shoot
can
bucks are
slide
totally
under
legal.
the radar.
So this is, by the way, Cyanide 2020 says something, and this is one of those snide but moronic comments that I'm going to call out because I can't stand this stupidity with this. So go live in the woods in a cabin you built, Carter. The reason for taxes is obvious. For fuck's sake.
I mean, my dad
No,
did do that.
it's not obvious. For fuck's sake. For fuck's sake, what you're doing is stealing from other people. Living in a society does not require theft from your neighbors. And if that's what you think civilization is, you're a moron. The United States did not have income taxes for a very long time. You can live peacefully and voluntarily with other people in a community without those people stealing your stuff and violating your rights. And if you can't see that, you are part of the problem. Voluntary cooperation is a necessary, beautiful, and virtuous thing among humans. But taxing at gunpoint is still theft, no matter how you want to cut it. It's still theft. If 51% of the people vote to enslave the other 49, it doesn't make slavery moral. Voting is not a substitute for morals. Democracy is not a substitute for morality. It's not. So, sorry, I got riled up on that one. Okay, so for UBI, I've heard the argument that UBI is better than welfare.
Yeah.
That may be true. I don't know. But let's be real.
Wait, can you, since you have done, can you just briefly say for those who don't know what you're...
Sorry, Cyanide is just trolling because now they're bringing up my Rhodes arguments. Sorry, I didn't realize it was just a troll.
Oh, the roads that,
What about my roads?
Opinions about that.
Yeah, I know. Free people would never, ever figure out a way to get from one place to another without the government taxing people. Anyway, UBI, the argument that I've heard is that, this is the argument I've heard about the difference, is that welfare incentivizes non-work somehow, and the UBI doesn't. So everyone gets some sort of level playing field thing where they can have their minimum sustenance, which is not a real term. That's not a philosophical term. Like minimum sustenance is just like what you think. Tomorrow, minimum sustenance will require a high-speed internet connection, right? So, so that's the argument I've heard, is that that UBI doesn't have the negative moral hazard of encouraging non-productivity. It doesn't do that. It doesn't encourage you to stay out of the productive system. And so if you give everyone something, then people can be productive, and maybe they'd have an incentive because presumably you'd get some low-level amount. But look, to be honest, I don't know if that's true or not. It doesn't really matter because let's be clear. I'm willing to have a serious conversation about UBI after you abolish welfare. Then we can have a talk about how UBI is better. But the truth is, no one's going to abolish welfare and replace it with UBI. They're going to add UBI and promise to maybe lessen welfare later. Mm-hmm. So it's just more. It's more. It's more taxes. It's more theft. It's more theft.
Income tax. It started. The federal income tax was 1913 or so, right?
Yeah, I think so. We existed on excise taxes and some other stuff for a while.
So then, I mean, like, and people
which I also
were
oppose,
living,
but whatever.
Yeah, without that taxes, because I just saw the same commenter too about. He's not a troll; he's just disagreeing. But he did say that. I lost it already. Oh, that like that it's the benefit. Taxes are the benefits of living in a civilized society, but you can live in one without taxes. Like there's the possibility.
Yeah. Because all societies who have taxed you have been civilized.
Yeah, true.
Taxes are what make a society civilized. Theft at gunpoint makes you civilized. I mean, you don't even know what the word civilized means if that's your argument. Look, the fact is, I know people, quite a few people, many of the people in this chat who would voluntarily contribute to things that we all agreed were in our mutual benefit in a free society, if we had a free society, right? Look, when you go on vacation with friends and you share a house, you voluntarily pay for stuff that you need. You voluntarily go to the store. People take on roles. Like you can as a community do things together voluntarily. Charities exist. People do pay for things that they want voluntarily. Gunpoint is not necessary for. In fact, I would not only say what I'd say. Gunpoint's not necessary for civilization. Forcing people's behavior at gunpoint is the antithesis of civilization. Civilization is I like this Rand definition, but civilization is the process of protecting man from men. That's what civilization is, right?
Yeah.
It's the process of protecting you from other people with guns, from other people who wish to do you harm, to initiate the use of force. So if you don't think that you can live in a society in which people will voluntarily cooperate, and these things like roads will be taken care of, that's just a reflection of your own psychological shortcomings, because you wouldn't contribute. You're so bad of a person that you can't imagine contributing. Well, I don't want to live in a society with you. Go away. Go be a communist. I'll hang out with people like Taxtera, who will gladly, ironically, her name's Taxtera, but she will contribute voluntarily.
She said that
Beverly will contribute voluntarily. Right? We will do this stuff voluntarily. We've all given money to charity. We've all given money to things that we care about. Hell, if I could take part of my taxes and direct them towards more efficiently towards fixing some of the roads that I use, I would. Right. I'd also gladly pay tolls on roads if I wanted them to work better. I'd also gladly contribute to national defense if it was actual national defense and not bombing random people in the Middle East. So, this idea that this is the problem. You've been indoctrinated you get indoctrinated by society because you grow up looking around you and thinking the way things are is the way they always have to be. It's the right way to be. How are roads paid for? Well, the government pays for them. Therefore, that's the way to pay for them. It's the only way to pay for them. That's just dumb. Right?
Right.
The government doesn't pay for iPhones. Like that entire supply chain, which is way more complex than roads, happens without the government. So, you look around at the way things are and you conclude that this must necessarily be the only way they can work. And that's just false. They're not the only way that they can work.
But it's tough, though. Like, I get that, like, I agree, but I also understand why people, because when that's something that's all you've ever known, it is difficult to, and that's why we've talked about this before, of just, it's difficult to step outside of that box and see, like, okay,
it is very hard. I get it.
And, but I think that's why this conversation is good for people to have, though, too, to just kind of understand, like, yeah, like I still really love, and I keep forgetting his name, from the host of Unframe of Mind when you
Daniel Wagner.
interviewed him before.
Yep.
Daniel Wagner. But I loved his reason about like privatizing roads and stuff too, about like, well, if the government wasn't paying for them and then other people didn't want to, that could incentivize other people to try and build like flying cars, something that doesn't need roads, other things that could be better use.
When you start thinking about, by the way, I want to, Mr. Sparkle Gleam says, but we've always had Obamacare, which is, exactly what I saw this morning, right? But when you start thinking about things, just roads are a great example, because when you start thinking about the government's involvement in roads, and because they also subsidize oil in many ways, and like, so they've done a lot to, like, if you just look at the automotive industry and roads generally, like the government's had their fingers in a lot of things. And if you step back and you think to yourself, well, if they didn't do any of this, would we have suburbs in the same way that we do? Would the layouts of cities be like they are? Like, would we need cars in the way we can? I mean, I don't know what the world would look like. I have no idea, right? If you had asked me 50 years ago what a handheld computer would look like that connected to every other device in the world, I would not have been able to say the iPhone, right? I would have taken some guesses and whatever, but look at old science fiction. They
a miniature laptop
didn't get this right, right? So Like saying what it would look like without it, I don't know. But I know that it can work. If people want it, it will happen. If they want it, if they want it, they're willing to pay for it voluntarily. And the beautiful thing about a voluntary society, and this is the thing I want to underline here, because I think it's important for those people who don't want a voluntary society, who think, okay, I want a little bit of taxes or a little bit of this, or I want this or that or whatever. Okay, fine. In a voluntary society, and I'm going to use voluntary not in the anarchist sense right now, because I know there's minarchists in chat, and mostly.
Here.
Right, you. I'll say a voluntarily funded minarchist government, which is a thing, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a society like that, people who don't want to be part of that, people who want taxes and they want to have they don't think that society will work. It's not for them. They don't like it. They disagree with me. They think I'm an idiot. We're never going to have roads in that society. It's going to be horrible. They need to have taxes. Literally nothing prevents them. Nothing. We will not prevent you. No one will prevent you, because it's not about the initiation of the use of force. No one prevents you from going off with your buddies, marking off a little territory. You say, this is our area. We've signed an agreement that we're going to run this area by different rules and stay out. Okay. Go do your thing. Go do your thing. We're not going to stop you. You can have your commune. Mm-hmm. You can have your commune in a free society, but you can't have a free society in a commune. And that should tell you something about the moral value of each. One is a busybody authoritarian's wet dream, and the other one is one that respects individuals. The one that respects individuals lets the authoritarians go have your little wet dream over there, do your magical commune. If it works, good for you. But we're going to live in a society where we leave each other the fuck alone. That's not too much to ask. It is too much to ask for many people, but not for the people who
So, all right, here's a
that's called the country, Carter. Yeah, it is called the country. That's basically what I'm saying, Rodrigo. We're going to leave them to have their country. You could also do it without a country. You could say, you guys are willing to you can do this by contract, but if it was done by contract, they would have to let people out to join society, people who opted out of that and said, you know what, I don't like it anymore, I'm leaving. You could do a non-country. You could just do a little commune. If paying for pizza was voluntary, why the fuck would you pay for it? It is voluntary, moron. Paying for pizza is voluntary, retard.
What?
Jesus, you don't have to buy a pizza. I don't know. Where do you live?
Makes sense.
Are you in like literally communism where they force you to buy a pizza? My God. All right.
Megan D also says, except that it'll be the rich that pay the most to maintain roads, so they'll own them and toll others as much as they want. So
yeah, that's the monopoly fallacy. Like maybe, but then people will just not build their things there. Don't use those roads. Go like
build other roads and make
like the idea that a rich person can just charge whatever they want and rape society because they have the monopoly on the road in the area is just false. Like people react. People don't. It doesn't work that way.
Right. And then again,
all the monopolies in history have had government support. That's how they became monopolies. It just doesn't happen. So
yeah. So that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, this is not I get that it's a stretch too far. I get that it's a stretch too far for people, but again, this is why I always talk about principles. If you have principles and you recognize individual rights, you got to be consistent about what individual rights means. And if you don't want to be consistent, then, no, it isn't voluntary because you can't get one unless you pay, dumb fuck. I'm sorry. This guy doesn't even know what he's doing.
I know. I said I don't think he understands.
Eating a pizza is voluntary. If you want one, you must pay for it. That's not the initiation of the use of force. That's voluntary. Because I'm not going to make one for you. I don't want to. But Beverly might. That's voluntary. She'll make it for a certain deal. Lateral thinking. Oh, God, some people are so... You don't even belong in this community. You are so dumb. You don't belong here. I'm gonna be done with this guy. Oh my God.
Jeez.
It's stupidity. I don't like to diss on our followers, but that guy's a moron.
I mean, I appreciate that for whatever reason they are watching this. I don't.
I guess there's a downvote,
So
but Jesus.
yeah, probably. But
I'll stop
I
arguing
don't.
though, because it's a waste of my time, and everyone in chat sees how ridiculous the arguments are. So I'll stop.
Right. I think the rest
All right,
can.
let's move
So
on. What else do you want to talk about?
someone else had an Case Kits had just kind of thrown out a topic of to talk about was food stamps. Who deserves it? And I think it's just kind of regarding like with UBI or like who. And this is something too that another close friend of mine she's talked about. Like she's kind of veered more into the socialism side because she just cares a lot about people. Like she wants people to take it. Like and she grew up
Right.
poor and stuff too. So it's just kind of coming from that side of like, well, I know what it's like to be poor and not have it. Like we need to have welfare too. So just having those options. So that's where like I get where she's coming from on that side. But
Right.
I think at least if we're going to have stuff like that, I'm more okay with social programs if they're per state at the very least, rather than at federal level, like the states or more local levels too. If we're going to have those, then at least be among the community, the smaller communities, rather than the entire federal government doing some sort of flat thing, because the country's huge and people are and the states and stuff are all different.
I mean, I
But
certainly like local stuff better because it's more controllable. I still think it's the initiation of the use of force to take money from people by force. I mean, I don't
for sure. I mean,
explain that, but
if we're going to
um,
have them, then I would rather at least
yeah,
I find that less
yeah,
obnoxious.
yeah. I think because you get more control at the local level, and there's more accountability, so it makes the infringement easier to contain. I think is the way I would describe it. But yeah, I mean, I get the wanting to help people thing, and I think that's a good sentiment. But you can't just put your head in the stand about the moral violations you have to make in order to implement what you want to implement, right? I mean, if you want to, like, a lot of people say, oh, the minimum wage should be blankety blank. You should pay your employees more. Okay, well, start a business and pay your employees more. You're allowed to do that. You can do that. People should have more blankety blank, or people should be helped in this way. Like, okay, you can go do that. You can go help them. You can start a charity, and charities are certainly, they can be very admirable things to do, right? And so charity's great, but helping people, the end doesn't justify the means. So saying, well, I'm stealing from this person because I care about this other person, it still makes you a thief, right? It still makes you a thief. The end doesn't justify the means. And I don't hear, like, even the people who are disagreeing, with this on a regular basis, I don't hear moral arguments beyond, there's some collectivist arguments about how, basically anti-individual rights arguments, like, you're a pawn of the state and there's some greater cause. Like, okay, we could have that argument. I've heard the social contracts arguments, but those arguments are pretty weak. Like, you didn't sign a contract. You can't be born into a social contract, right? And the idea of a contract that someone doesn't sign but is enforceable kind of relies on then understanding that they would sign it if they could. So you have like DNR type of things, or like things where people are incapacitated and you can make contractual rulings as their executor if it's like, okay, well, or as their proxy if it's like, well, there's reason to believe this person would have done this, if they could. Like, there's those kind of weird cases. But the idea that, you guys have all voted on what I agree to, that's not a thing. That's just numbers, right? Like, numbers is not philosophy. Numbers is not morals. 51% isn't a moral argument. So, and I think it's hard for people to reconcile that, and they don't want to. So they run away from those moral arguments, and they get angry, and they just say, well, we need it. And they just throw platitudes out. Well, it's the price we pay for blah, blah, blah. Or, well, we need more roads or social contract or whatever. And okay, like, I actually have more respect for people on the left like the guy I interviewed, Michael Gonzalez, who flat out said, "Oh yeah, the initiation of the use of force is okay in these circumstances." Like, I could argue with that,
Right.
but the people that are just kind of like, "Oh, it's not use of force. It's not the initiation of the use of force. It's a social contract." It's like, okay, well, you're just lying to yourself, and everyone
Yeah.
sees
So,
it, right? So.
so at least he was open, like consistent in that.
Yeah, like, okay, I'm going to use the initiation, like, and then you can have a philosophical conversation and say, okay, well, let's talk about the initiation of these force. Let's talk about individual rights. Let's talk about where you think they come from, why you think they don't apply in this case, or whatever. You can have that conversation. But people who just say, oh yeah, I believe in individual rights, and then you point out, well, doesn't this thing violate those rights? And they just bury their head in the sand and say, like, no, platitude. Here's a phrase which doesn't mean anything and isn't an argument, and just run away because they don't want to deal. They don't want to deal with the reality that, yeah, they're kind of violating individual rights. So, whatever. I'm not imagining that we'll get to a utopia where everyone is in agreement with me. I just, what I would like to see is, in the short term, some changes in our culture that at least are more aligned with individual rights. And, there are definitely minarchists who believe taxation should be forced, and they'll bury their head in the sand on that issue. Maybe some of them will make an argument that the use of force is okay for some reason. That's fine. There are people who do that, and at least we're moving in the right direction. I don't think, the reason I said, the reason that we talk about philosophy being upstream of culture, and then Breitbart talked about culture being upstream of politics, is ultimately none of this stuff works. None of these political systems works. Everything from anarchy to monarchy to democracy to anything, none of it works if the culture is not in alignment with it. It just doesn't. So yeah, it doesn't work. You need a culture of the right values.
Yeah.
This is what I meant. The other day I mentioned again this idea of, like, the left saying, well, you can have the Constitution, we'll take your dictionary, right? Because this is a way to describe what's happening in society now. When culture is willing to corrupt language and make things mean whatever they want them to mean, and when the philosophy of that culture is so bad that there's that is just disconnected from the philosophy and cultural milieu that was present at the founding of the nation, then you can interpret the founding documents literally however you want. The words have no meaning anymore. So, and we see that. We see lots of people look at very clear passages, Second Amendment being one, and they look at it and they say, well, doesn't actually mean that, or blah, blah, blah. They just make up whatever they want it to mean. The Commerce Clause is another example of, like, well, we can extend our power indefinitely through this little Commerce Clause. So I think this is why I'm not a big fan of political solutions that are like, well, we need to change this or add this amendment or do this thing. No one gives a crap. No one's reading it. If they were reading the Constitution and applying it, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in right now. We wouldn't have this conversation. We'd be busy doing something else. I'd probably still be a cryptographer doing tech. Like, if we were applying the Constitution, none of us would be upset about the future. We wouldn't be worrying about a civil war. This wouldn't be a mess. We're not.
Right.
We're not. So changing the words on the paper is like, I don't know why that's even a plausible solution in people's minds.
But then I wouldn't know
the
any
culture.
of you guys.
Huh?
But then I wouldn't know anyone in an unsafe space community. So
Right.
I'd be still just ignoring all of the comedians because they're just all the liberals and stuff that I knew, and
Right.
wouldn't have been a part of anything.
Right.
But so I guess silver lining.
Yeah.
So I know, and I know how much you hate democracy too. Just how much.
Look, I don't. Here's the thing. Politically, I don't have a great solution. This is. I mean, I'm not going to run around saying I know the answers. I know culturally and philosophically the direction we need to go. Politically, I know kind of the direction we need to go. I don't like democracy blows chunks. Our founding father knew founding fathers knew that. Like it's horrible. So the republic was kind of a republic was kind of close. I guess it was an attempt to limit the voracious appetite of of mobs in a democracy. Kind of, sort of worked a little bit for a little while. When culture gets to the point in which we all want a society where individual rights are protected, then we can have a conversation about the right way to do it. But we're not even at the point, right?
So here's a democracy anecdote from D&D.
Oh my
Or I
god.
might have
Okay.
told you about this
Oh
offline
yeah, you
before,
have.
but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't remember. Oh yeah, okay. So they, my part, I'm the DM in this group, and the party has this minor wish that they can make, and they told them that like they decided that it was going to be a unanimous vote of what they want, and 5 out of 6 of them wanted the sand wish. It was going to be unlimited sandwich coming from a hat that one of the characters has.
Okay.
So it was going to be forever sandwich. So they called it the sand wish. And 5 of 6 of them wanted it. The sixth one didn't. And I was talking about something as an aside, and I said like, yeah, I don't really like pure democracy. And that sixth guy was like, oh, why not? And I was just like, the sandwich, the thing that you're like, everyone else wants this. So like, luckily it's a unanimous thing. But if it was just majority, you would have had this wish and you didn't want it.
Look, democracy is not antithetical to slavery. I don't know how much more simple I can make it. Democracy does not guarantee no slavery at all. That's how minorities get enslaved. Democracy. The end. If that's what you want,
Yeah.
that's all. Democracy is just that, right? So there needs to be limits on democracy, and that's what the idea of the republic is, right? So whether those limits will work, I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I still think we've talked about this before too about like I don't think the voting thing matters as much. I think if we had the right kind of people like culture mentality, I think we'd be fine. I wouldn't mind a monarchy. I wouldn't mind a king ruling us if he protected our rights. Like if it was just like I care about the individual rights, I'm going to protect you from foreign invaders. I'm going to protect you from local ones too that are going to like be attacking others. So we'll have a justice system and stuff. But like as long as that's happening, I don't really care if we can vote on people or not.
right, right.
Going back to the economics stuff though too, Skynes had said if we've seen any negative interest rates happen here yet, and I was going to
Skeins,
ask that
yeah.
early. Skeins,
I think it's
Skeins,
Skeins, isn't it? No,
Skeins. I don't know.
I learned that from
Um,
Maria Tuscan. So if that's not right,
ooh, okay,
blame her.
but it is lower. Like I have Ally,
I don't
which
think
I really love.
I don't think we've hit negative actual interest
Not
rates.
negative.
Although, didn't we flew really close? We hit 0. We might have had negative for a moment, but not
Oh, really?
realized.
So
I
I
don't
had
think we had realized negative rates.
2.2%
Germany
interest
has, I
rate,
think.
and yeah, that's someone mentioned in chat too. But so I went from 2.2% and it's just been like creeping down, and now I'm at only 0.6%. So
Right.
it's really disheartening.
It
But
discourages saving.
yeah, can you explain more into like I think I have the general understanding of what, so when you're not saving, then you're going to be spending and trying to put back into the economy is my basic understanding of that. Is that how that's what it's
That's
supposed
the
to be?
Keynesian
Or
idea, right? It's this idea that saving is bad, and it's this idea that spending is good. And of course, we've set up metrics whereby that is true because the metrics measure spending. So, woohoo! If you measure the right thing, you get the right answer. But in actual value, saving is actually necessary. And saving, people think of saving. I think I mentioned this the other day, but people think of saving as you put some money in a bank, you put $1,000 in the bank, and it sits there. And look, it's not quote, doing anything. You could be taking that $1,000 and buying sandwiches, and suddenly people would have jobs, right? And so there's this criticism of saving as if the money doesn't do anything when it's sitting there. Now, you could make that argument if that $1,000 was under your mattress. Then it's not doing anything. Saving's still beneficial for you. It should be, although in an inflationary economy, you're losing value putting your money under your mattress, which is a separate issue. But if you're a normal person, you put it in a bank. And we can just start with just a bank, not any fancy investments, just a bank. Okay, well, the bank doesn't take the money and stick it in a mattress or in a vault. That's not what they do with your money. It doesn't sit there. They lend it out. In fact, in fractional reserve banking, they actually lend out a multiple of it. So they lend that money out. Now, they don't lend it out so people can buy sandwiches. They lend it out usually so people can start businesses. It's an investment lend. It's investment in new production that's lent out. And that's one of the most important. Access to capital is one of the most important things that can get small businesses started. So what you're taking away when you raid Beverly's bank account, or when you don't provide the interest to the bank, or when you discourage Beverly from putting money in her bank account because it's 0.6 instead of, I mean, interest rates. I remember checking accounts going like I think as high as like 5-6%. Like
I've heard about these.
Right? Yeah, that's not unusual. That wasn't unusual. So when you disincentivize people to save, what you're doing is you're encouraging consumerism at the expense of the production that would be happening on the other end if that money was being lent out, especially if it was being lent out at a multiple. Again, fractional reserve banking, if you've got $1,000 in your account, they might be lending out $8,000-9,000 based off of that $1,000. So, which is actually another form of inflation. Monetary system gets complicated, and we can argue against fractional reserve banking another time. But that's basically the setup. So people who make these arguments generally ignore one side of the equation completely because it's inconvenient. They ignore the side of like, yeah, but that money in your account would have been enabling other businesses to do things. And that activity isn't happening anymore. Instead, you're just buying sandwiches. And so, yeah, that's why that's a fallacy. That's why that's why you should be encouraging saving. Saving is an important part of the health of an economy. And actually, long term, an economy where people are miserly but save a lot of money is actually quite productive economy. You don't need a lot of consumer spending. Consumer spending doesn't add to the productivity. If you spend, like, I don't need a new TV, but if I junked the TV behind me and bought a new one, that would be new consumer spending. But I haven't really added to the productivity of our nation. I mean, I guess someone had to make the TV, but if instead I spent that money and started a sandwich shop of my own or whatever, or like started a business or invested it in something, I would be actually adding to the productivity of society. And it's productivity that raises the standard of living, not paper dollars. It's productivity that matters. It's the aggregate productivity of a society divided by the people in that society is kind of a rough way to think about standard of living. And productivity it's not just money. It's stuff that gets produced, literal stuff, right? Medicine, housing, new technology, like all that stuff is productive. Those are things that humans are doing to improve the quality of life of everyone. And so that stuff is what suffers when you encourage consumer spending. And worse than consumer spending is consumer deficit spending, which is also encouraged, in which I buy the TV and I don't have the money. But I have to pay, 20% more for the TV later on. So I've actually spent more money than the TV was worth. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I gotta say that it kind of works though, as far as lowering it, making me see like, oh, it's only 0.6% now. Like, why even bother? Like, it is the thing that just pops up immediately when I see it. Not that I'm still
Sure.
saving, I'm still putting stuff in
Well,
there,
I
but it
mean,
just kind of has this
savings
like, oh,
accounts are a bad way to like just from a personal finance perspective. There's many better things to do with your money. So as soon as you have any pittance saved up, you should seriously start thinking about doing something else with it,
what should
not
I
just
do with
sticking it in
it?
a savings account. I mean,
Can
that's a
you
whole separate
financially
conversation.
advise me?
I'm not a financial advisor, so but I mean, there's kind of basic strategies of like three buckets where you have some high growth stuff,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
like right, and then some less risky stuff, and then some you know hedging your bets kind of stuff. Like, there's different strategies there, but I like the diversification in general is a good concept, and so you can find a strategy that works for you based on your life goals and what you want, and do that. But there's no reason to keep U.S. dollars in any large amount anywhere ever, because they're just
Well,
getting savings accounts aren't giving you a lot of interest, and inflation is killing their value. So
the only reason that we really had much savings anyway was just because we were going to use it. We like to travel. And then
right,
now that we couldn't travel this year. So now instead, I'm going to end up spending all that money on trying to buy a house or build one or something here too within the next year. So soon I'll have nothing. But
there you go.
uh,
No
so I'll
better way to
wait
be
to put
poor than to
money.
own a house. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Someone in chat
Uh,
earlier, King Mob earlier said, "What do you think?" This is just a weird question, which is why I want to address it. But I'm not reading all the chats, but I'm, sometimes if I can catch it, I'm seeing it, guys. Um, King Mom says, "What do you think about the word sortition, which I'm not familiar with, which is replacing elections with lottery selections from qualified pools?" And he says it's kind of like jury duty, I guess. He says it's not partisan; everyone gets a chance, and can be done locally and statewide. And it says it has been done successfully in some places, including Australia, Ireland, Canada, and Iceland. Well, I'm not. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the ultimate solution to any of this is political. That said, I kind of like my friend and I used to joke about the idea of it would be much better if we picked the president randomly from the phone book. That was back when there was a thing called the
oh,
phone
yeah.
book. I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that. Um,
I remember you talking about this
yeah, but
and just put them in
um,
charge.
yeah. So the you there's some benefits to a system like that. Number one, um, this is kind of actually this is kind of it's the same philosophy of self selection. This is going to sound like a tangent, but it's not. So you tell kids if you're a parent and you don't know this you tell kids when they're lost to find an adult. They have to choose the adult to help them if they need help. You want them to choose an adult, and you can give them rules like women on average are better to choose, women with children are better. So like find a woman with kids and get some help, right? But what that does is because you're making the selection, you've drastically reduced the odds that a predator selects you. If you let yourself get selected and wait for an adult to come up and say, "Can I help you?" the odds greatly increase that that person that's offering to help you is not the person you want helping you, right?
Hmm.
And so that's kind of similar to how I view political office. So if you randomly select someone, you're much less likely to get someone who really is a power whore, who really
Hmm.
wants to do like just wants to be in power and is like totally willing to do this. You're more likely to get someone who's just kind of an average person who doesn't really doesn't
Well, I
doesn't
think
have a fetish for wielding power, which is good.
couldn't we also
Um,
say that this all of politics and stuff too, that if they weren't full-time jobs, like at the most part-time, or it was just kind of like a stipend or something too when you show up and do it, though, like, so you have less incentive to try and do more, to like, because you don't doing it doesn't give you much money or power and stuff too. So then you're just kind of like, well, I need to maintain my main work, and I'm just doing this part
Right.
time. And
Right.
which my hometown, I think, like actually did too. I wasn't very familiar in politics until I was a newspaper reporter for a little bit. But so at like the city council meetings, like I learned that our mayor, she just did it part time. Like I think she was a hairdresser or something. So,
Right.
um,
Right.
but and when you're actively involved in, like, you have your own business or a job or something too, then you're kind of like, oh, I'm contributing or part of the economy here, and so that matters to me rather than just being outside of it in the government and getting paid
Right.
from having other people pay me through
Right.
taxes.
So that's the argument I've heard. That's an argument I've heard for it. Of course, once they get some power, maybe they'll become very excited about power. The other argument is people would have no respect for them because everyone would know they were randomly chosen out of a phone book, and no respect for your leaders is probably good because you don't expect them to solve problems or to do special things, and you don't want to give them extra power. Like if the president were randomly chosen, no one would want to give the president like massive,
Yeah.
expansive power because it would be like, well, I don't know, it's going to be some moron that gets in office, right? Like who knows? So I think that's I think that's another argument. I think the problem with I think early on senators and stuff weren't paid, like they had other jobs, right? They went back home to their farms or whatever. I think nowadays, because the government has so much power, you would just get people like massively wealthy people with vested interests in wielding power for their financial benefit to volunteer. So I'm not sure that would solve the problem. And I also as much as we can say politicians are bad, and maybe this isn't a bad thing, I'm just going to throw this out, but like you could get someone who's like seriously mentally deficient, and like randomly you could get some doozies in office, right? So I don't know. I don't think it's ultimately the solution, but I don't have like I'm not like really opposed to it. It's a fun idea, I guess. Uh, you know,
Uh, Chris says, watch Carter be the first person elected out of the phone book.
right. My first, I mean, look, this is why no one would ever vote for me, right? For many reasons, which I understand. I'm self-aware enough, but yeah, I would be like, oh, what office am I in? My first act will be to basically dissolve everything that office does and then quit.
I would vote for you. Well, can you dissolve everything else first, then that office, and then
Whatever I
quit?
have power to dissolve, I would dissolve.
Yeah, I
All
would
right,
vote for
done.
you.
Then I'm done. I don't want to be. I don't. I don't want that power because that power is a great responsibility, and I'm not stupid enough to think that I can centrally plan anything. I want the genius of people in society solving their own problems. I don't want to be in charge of anyone else's life. But you know,
But when you don't trust your leader and stuff too, then that makes you want to be more autonomous and just like, okay, well, I need to
right,
rely on myself and make sure that everything's good for me.
right.
But yeah, they hang on. There was another one too. Someone Trisha had asked earlier too, what you think about one world currency. So that would
Well,
just be
I
a
don't like it, and I'll
globalist
tell you
sort
why.
of thing.
I'll tell you why I don't like it. I don't like it because one world currency is the lifeblood of one world government. That's why do you think they
Yeah.
want one world currency? Like our currency is already controlled by an oligarchy, basically. It's already a highly manipulated tool of control. But at least the governments have to negotiate with each other on their currencies. At least there's quote competition, not really competition, but there's some level of competition at a behind closed doors between the Rothschilds and someone else. I don't know. There's like something has happened in there that's not like one world currency is literally that's the one ring that rules them all, right? Is one world currency. That's the one ring. And whoever controls that currency, because by the way, they wouldn't be proposing, how about it's gold? Like One world currency means some select group of elitists gets to control a currency. And the ones I've seen the basket of currencies model, what are the draft notes? I forget what they're called. There's different versions of it, but none of them are gold, right? I guess
Right.
gold would be one world currency. But in a free society, you don't need one world currency. People can choose whatever they want to be currency and use it to exchange value amongst themselves. So it's a
Yeah, it's a
2 hour.
lot of
I feel like I've been yelling for 2 hours. I
economics.
know I got very
You
emotional, but
you've been yeah.
emotion. This is the thing I want to knock out of people's minds. Emotion does not mean irrational. Reason and emotion
Hmm.
coexist. I am very passionate about this stuff. I'm very animated. I can get very angry or very happy and about lots of these issues. The danger lies in letting that emotion drive the thought process. And if you catch me doing that, call me out on it. But I'm not articulating any positions that weren't derived by me in quiet, contemplative
Right.
thought.
Well, and just also I mean, like even yeah, letting it drive the conversation and or just getting out of hand to where like you're not coherent enough to that. So I think it's just trying to keep emotions in check to an
I
extent,
know.
and
I know.
just
It
in
gets
general,
exciting.
not you. Like you were fine today. I'm just saying in general, just as like a personal
Here's the thing:
thing.
as important as it is to try your best, and look, we all fail, but as important as it is to try your best and be rational and make arguments based on an objective reality and use reason as your tool and try and unravel this stuff and stand by principles, as important as that is, how do I want to say this? It's important. That's important because it matters. It's a life or death question. People, you get these questions wrong, and 100 million people die of communism last century. Like, you make errors here, and this is not an armchair discussion. This is a discussion about real people, real lives, real consequences. So that's why I can get really animated when people make even something that sounds esoteric like a minimum wage law. That's about real people and real consequences, and people suffer if you don't think through that rationally and have the a rational approach that takes into account individual rights. So I think it's actually necessary to get angry and upset. I think emotions are necessary because otherwise, what the hell are you motivated for? If I'm sitting here in a disconnected armchair kind of way going, well, I think capitalism is superior to communism, but I don't really care one way or another, like, then who the hell cares? Why are you listening to me? It matters. All this stuff really, really fucking matters. And it will matter more and more as our society gets deeper and deeper into this existential crisis that we seem to be in. So that's the end of my rant.
So I was trying to figure out in chat here, great crispy one. I think he says later on that he's sassing you, so I think it was just sarcasm.
Oh, I don't
But
know.
at first it was like, what? So do you listen to SJWs when they are emotional, hypocrite
Yeah.
much? And like, oh my bad. So Carter's manly emotions are okay. SJW emotions are automatic fallacy. Got it. So if that is sarcasm, either way though, I just think
No,
that
whatever.
yeah, like emotions are
Yeah,
okay to
sure.
have, but then if it's based on rational reasons like that, but then when you see SJWs, like okay, when you actually question them on the stuff that they're getting riled up and emotional over, you find out like, oh, like you don't have a good reason for why you're upset. You just got offended by something innocuous that didn't even offend the people that you're offended on behalf of,
Right.
and a
Pointing
lot
out
of
someone
times
has
so.
emotions is not an argument. And having emotions is not a fallacy. Relying on the emotionality of your argument is the fallacy. So, if an SGW is making a great argument, which I haven't heard yet, but assuming they could make a great argument about something, they could get emotional about it. And me picking on their emotions that's not an argument against them, right? So yeah, like I would totally listen to an SJW. I try and listen to what they say, and mostly I disagree with what they say.
It's
Maybe not
gibberish.
always, but mostly. Huh? What?
I said it's gibberish. Mostly, it's gibberish for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why yeah, I'm not against emotions,
Yeah,
but I
I
just
just
don't
want
think
to
that they need to be.
I wanted to point that out, that fallacy out, because people will try and use it like, because when you say things like Ben Shapiro has that, I don't even agree with a lot of Ben Shapiro, but isn't he the one that has that facts don't care about your feelings thing? Is that
Yeah.
him?
Yeah,
Right?
I believe so.
So this is this attempt to elevate reason in a discussion over feelings, which it should be elevated intellectually over feelings. But that doesn't mean that having feelings is a sign of irrationality or is irrelevant, or that you, or not that it's relevant. It doesn't mean that having feelings is a sign of irrationality. It doesn't mean that showing feelings undermines your argument. It just means when evaluating the argument at the end of the day, you got to tease out the emotions and look at the reasons, and argue with the reasons. And you can argue them with them emphatically and in an impassioned way, as both people on the left and right do. Some people, but that's all that means. And
Hmm.
it's a sleight of hand to people, like people who can't argue use that sleight of hand to be like, oh, you're showing emotions, therefore you're not logical. That's not how that works. So I'm proud of my emotions. I am a very passionate person, actually. So this is why
Yeah.
I'm
I mean,
doing this. This is why I'm doing this.
yeah, and we've talked about too where the most I'm not always the most emoting of people. I can be, like sometimes I can have a lot more, but it varies. I've had to practice it. Like in high school I was just a lot more monotone, so then in college I had to practice like fluctuating my voice and try to seem like a person, and eventually that just became more natural for me. But and there are times, like I think sometimes emotion does, like I've gotten like very angry at certain, usually at like inanimate object. Like I Hulk out. That's one of the superheroes that I said that I would like related to the most. Where I remember trying to like move a couch out to help out like my dad. He was like getting a new couch, so I'm like, oh, I'll move this one out myself. And it was a beast to do, and I was just like raging, trying to get so frustrated. But then other times, like I've said that I'm half robot because I don't emote that well. But I can also be like such a big crier over like anything heartwarming, anything like even dumbly heartwarming, where I've like what was it, a Budweiser commercial where the guy like raises his horse and they part ways, and then he meets back up with his horse later on as he's carrying like the
I don't
Budweiser,
have to see
and they
that one.
meet. And
I don't
it
remember that.
was a few years ago, but every time it came on I just started crying though too, because I was just, it's so beautiful. This man and his horse get back together. um
The
but
reunion of the man and his horse.
yeah,
Yeah,
just this 30-second commercial.
I just saw this comment and I just want to point this out. Someone said, Vegas Royal says math does not need emotions to solve a problem. Kind of, although oddly, but humans kind of do. So if humans are weird. We're kind of animated without any emotional content. It's difficult for us to be motivated to do anything. And I
Because you
vaguely remember
care,
reading a
you're
study
caring about
about this.
learning something.
Yeah, I vaguely remember, and I'm not going to be able to find the study, but I'm just going to paraphrase, and someone maybe if they're familiar with it can tell me. Uh, I remember reading the study about a guy who had some kind of damage to his brain where he was unable to feel things, like emotionally, and he he was paralyzed from action in like really amazing ways. Like he couldn't. There was something he had to do. I don't remember what it was. I don't think it was math, but it could have been. He couldn't decide what color pen to use because he didn't care. He had no feeling about what color pen to use,
Hmm.
and there was two choices. It's very difficult to make decisions and to actually be motivated to do anything without
Yes.
emotion.
When you
That's just
don't,
part of our makeup as humans.
yeah, no, I
So
definitely agree with that. When I just, oh, I don't know. I don't have a preference between whatever the choices are, though, too. So then it's like, okay, well, which one do I choose? And I like to think too. At one point, my dad asked me something like, do you want to get? It was probably going out to eat. Like, do you want to get McDonald's or whatever it was? And I said, like, I don't care. And he said, if you don't care, then you don't want it. So, like,
right,
okay, that's fair. That's a fair
yeah,
response to that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah. Um,
All right,
okay.
this has been
Well,
like over
it's
two
been
hours. Yeah,
it has been over 2 hours, and we definitely got into a lot of economics. We got you all riled up, so I think mission accomplished.
you got me
I
riled.
think we can. I think we can wrap it up here.
Wrap it up.
Yeah.
I feel weird because it's your show and I felt like I just gabbed the whole show, but I think
Oh,
that
no,
was
it's
your
fine.
plan. So
Yeah, it was to ask you because stuff that I didn't really know and just to kind of pick your brain about it. So yeah, absolutely. And I can chime in with some stuff, but I don't have as much knowledge in your as you do in your noggin. So, well, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. I think based on for the while that Carter will be on here because of at least for internet streaming wise, we're going to be moving it to what time is it? 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, 8:30, just because he's got other stuff. He's got more important things going on. So we're going to move it back a half hour, 7:30 p.m. Central, my time. So for those of you who are in the good time zone.
Well, I feel like I need to just go do some yoga.
Decompress.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Eat some ice cream. Okay, but yeah, thank you for watching. Thanks, Carter, for having the discussion with me. Please like, subscribe, and share the Unsafe Space videos and clips. You can donate to us at unsafespace.com/donate. We're also on Subscribestar. We're on social media stuff. We're on everything: Twitter, Facebook, Gab. I have my personal ones too, is at the dim side, and on Twitter, my display name is Oberon Lux right now still and that's an old D&D name that I had, but I wasn't using my personal name for a while because I was scared of getting doxxed. So don't be surprised to not see my name on there. But cool. Well, thank you guys for watching. Have a good night.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Please avoid any contact with these individuals. Even casual association with these people would be considered an overt act of sedition. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Principles are for suckers. The smart thing to do is to go along with everyone else. Computer voice Curtis, never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.